Most people lose the ones they love, because life runs out of time. I lost mine because someone who promised to love me decided I wasn't important enough to make the flight. At 5:17 on a cool Tuesday morning, Kendrick Holloway's phone vibrated against the oak nightstand beside his bed. He opened his eyes before the second buzz, his body already trained by years of early flights and impossible schedules. The name on the screen made his chest tighten. Mary's Medical Center. He answered before the ringtone could finish. Drewter Ellison's voice was calm, but it carried the weight that only difficult calls ever carried. Mir. Holloway, I think you should come as soon as possible. Your mother has taken a significant turn overnight. We believe she may only have a few hours. Kendrick closed his eyes. He didn't ask how long. Doctors never really knew. They only knew when hope had become smaller than time. I'll be there, he answered quietly. Please tell her I'm on my way. The call ended. The room felt strangely still. Beside him, Amani slept peacefully, her phone charging on the nightstand. Her calendar already filled with meetings she had spent weeks preparing for. Kendrick stood, pulled open the closet, and reached for the same navy travel jacket he always wore. Nothing about him suggested that he quietly owned Apex Horizon Aviation Group, a company worth more than $2 billion with routes crossing 4 continents. That was intentional. For nearly 12 years, he had stayed out of photographs, declined interviews, and allowed executives to represent the company, while he focused on building systems instead of attention. Only a handful of board members had ever seen the ownership documents bearing his signature. Even inside his own company, most employees believed the founder had retired years ago. Kendrick preferred it that way. His mother had taught him that respect earned through character lasted longer than admiration purchased by wealth. Loretta Holloway had spent 34 years teaching 3rd grade in Savannah before retiring with the same quiet dignity she carried into every room. She never cared that her son became one of the youngest aviation entrepreneurs in the country. She only cared whether he remembered to call every Sunday. He never missed one. Kendrick picked up his wallet, glanced once at the framed photograph sitting near the doorway, and gently touched the edge of the picture with 2 fingers. It showed him and Loretta standing beside an old fishing pier years before success had changed anything, except the size of his responsibilities. His phone buzzed again. A flight notification flashed across the screen. The earliest departure left in just over 90 minutes. He exhaled once, grabbed his keys, and walked toward the front door, believing that if he moved fast enough, there was still time to say goodbye. The interstate was nearly empty as Kendrick guided his black pickup toward Hartsfield, the dashboard clock quietly erasing the minutes he could never earn back. Every traffic light seemed determined to test his patience. His phone rested beside the gear selector, connected through the truck's hands-free system. He pressed the call button. Amani answered almost immediately. "Good morning. I need your help," Kendrick said. "The hospital called. My mother is dying. I have to reach Savannah before it is too late." The clicking of keyboards echoed faintly behind her. "What flight are you trying to board?" she asked. He gave her the flight number. A few seconds passed while she checked the system. "That departure is completely full." "I know it is full," Kendrick replied. "I also know operations control can release protected inventory during exceptional circumstances. Please approve 1 seat." Another pause followed. "Those seats are reserved for executive operational priorities," she answered. "This is an executive priority," Kendrick said quietly. "My mother has only a few hours left." Her voice remained calm, almost mechanical. "I am sorry to hear that, Kendrick, truly. But personal emergencies do not change company policy." He closed his eyes for a brief moment. "This company was built to move people when they need us most." "This company was built on consistency," she replied. "If I make one exception because you are my husband, every manager under me loses confidence in the process." The conversation ended without another word. 20 minutes later, Kendrick entered the departure terminal, carrying a single overnight bag. The gate agent greeted him with a polite smile, before typing his confirmation number into the computer. Her expression changed almost immediately. "Sir, I can see an emergency accommodation request attached to your reservation." She paused while reading the screen. "I am sorry. The request was reviewed and declined by passenger operations. It is marked as a final executive decision. I cannot override it from the gate." Kendrick thanked her anyway and stepped aside. Moments later, another airline employee approached the counter with a sharply dressed corporate traveler. "Operations just released one protected executive seat," the employee said, handing over a new boarding pass. "Mr. Raymond Carver has been cleared for boarding." The agent scanned the pass, wished the traveler a pleasant flight, and watched him disappear down the jet bridge. Kendrick never looked away from the window. The aircraft slowly pushed back from the gate, before turning toward the runway. Morning sunlight flashed across the silver fuselage as the engines gathered power. Within minutes it lifted smoothly into the Georgia sky, carrying with it the final chance to hear his mother's voice. His phone vibrated softly. A message from the hospital appeared on the screen. "Please come as quickly as you can. She keeps asking whether you are close." Kendrick lowered the phone, took one slow breath, and purchased a seat on the next available departure, already knowing that time had become the one thing money could not buy. The second flight landed in Savannah, just after sunset beneath a sky washed in pale orange and fading blue. Kendrick walked quickly through the small terminal without stopping for food, coffee, or luggage. His rental car was waiting near the entrance, already unlocked through the mobile application. 23 minutes later he pulled into the familiar parking lot outside Mary's Medical Center. The front entrance looked exactly as he remembered from dozens of visits over the past year. But something felt different before he even stepped inside. The reception desk was quieter. The hallway seemed slower. A nurse recognized him immediately and lowered her eyes before speaking. "Mr. Holloway, I am so sorry." He did not ask the question. He already knew the answer. She led him upstairs without another word. Outside room 417, Drer. Ellison stood with both hands folded in front of him. The physician removed his glasses and offered a gentle nod. "She passed away about 40 minutes ago. She was peaceful." Kendrick looked toward the closed door. His hand rested on the handle for several seconds before he pushed it open. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioner. Fresh flowers sat beside the window. A knitted blanket covered the empty hospital bed. Everything inside the room suggested that someone had simply stepped out for a moment. Except that everyone knew she never would again. Kendrick slowly crossed the room and stopped beside the chair where he had spent countless afternoons, listening to stories about his childhood, neighborhood baseball games, and the students who still mailed Christmas cards years after leaving her classroom. He reached down and gently touched the edge of the blanket. It still carried a trace of warmth from the afternoon sunlight falling across the window. His jaw tightened, but no tears came. Some losses were too large for tears at first. Drer. Ellison quietly entered carrying a small envelope and a worn leather watch with a cracked brown strap. "She asked me to give you these if you arrived after she fell asleep," he said softly. "She smiled when she handed them to me." Kendrick accepted both with careful hands. Inside the envelope rested a single folded sheet written in neat blue ink. "My dear boy, if you are reading this, then the Lord decided I could not wait any longer. Do not waste your heart searching for someone to blame. Carry kindness even when others do not deserve it, because that is how our family has always traveled through life. Remember that your name means more than your fortune ever will. Build things that help people find their way home. Love with courage. Lead with grace." Kendrick folded the letter exactly along its original creases and slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket. He fastened the old watch around his wrist. It was too small, just as it had been years ago, when he tried wearing his father's watch as a teenager. The leather barely reached the buckle, but he left it there anyway. As he walked back into the hallway, his phone lit up with a company calendar reminder. Executive Leadership Promotion Review, Thursday, 9 o'clock in the morning. He stared at the notification for several seconds before quietly pressing accept. The funeral ended beneath a gray afternoon sky that matched the quiet weight resting on every shoulder gathered around the small cemetery. Kendrick stayed after everyone else had begun walking back toward their cars. Fresh earth surrounded the simple granite marker that now carried Loretta Holloway's name. He removed the folded letter from his jacket one more time, reading the final sentence in silence before carefully placing it back where it belonged. A cool breeze moved through the pine trees, carrying the distant sound of church bells from somewhere across town. He looked down once more, touched the top edge of the headstone with the tips of his fingers, then turned without another word. 3 hours later he entered a private conference room inside Apex Horizon Aviation Group's Savannah regional office. No company logo decorated the walls. No executive photographs lined the hallway. The room existed for one purpose only: quiet decisions. Malcolm Pierce was already waiting beside a long walnut table. Terrence Sloan arrived seconds later carrying a slim black folder. Neither man offered condolences immediately. Both had known Kendrick long enough to recognize that sympathy could wait until facts were established. Kendrick placed a single boarding confirmation on the table. "I want every record connected to this reservation." Malcolm opened his laptop. Everything. Terrence nodded once. Reservation history. Gate activity. Internal communications. Manual overrides. Administrative approvals. Security access. We can retrieve all of it. Kendrick remained standing. No interviews. No accusations. No one knows this review exists. Malcolm typed several commands before turning the screen toward him. The system keeps permanent audit trails. Every action leaves a fingerprint. One by one the records appeared. Initial booking. Emergency priority request. Review queue. Administrative hold. Then another line appeared in bright blue. Executive override applied. Terrence leaned slightly closer to the display. That requires Vice President authorization. Another click revealed the employee identification number attached to the decision. The name loaded a second later. Amani Brooks Holloway. Nobody spoke. Malcolm continued scrolling through the activity log. 3 minutes after the override, another reservation had been approved using the exact same protected seat inventory. A passenger identified as Raymond Carver, Platinum Corporate Partner. Priority accommodation approved. The timestamp matched almost exactly. Kendrick watched the screen without changing expression. Open the communication history. Malcolm selected another file. An internal message appeared. Keep one executive seat available until Mr. Carver arrives. Decline all additional requests regardless of circumstance. Approval has already been granted. Sent from Vice President Passenger Operations. Terrence slowly closed the folder he had been carrying. She followed policy for one passenger and denied discretion for another. Kendrick looked through the conference room window toward the runway, where another aircraft lifted smoothly into the evening sky. His reflection stared back from the glass, calm and unreadable. "No," he said quietly. "She made a choice." Malcolm waited for further instructions. Kendrick finally turned away from the window. "Continue collecting every document connected to that morning. Preserve every recording. Lock every audit file. On Thursday, I want the complete picture sitting in front of me before anyone else enters that boardroom." Thursday morning arrived with clear skies and the steady rhythm of another business day, beginning across the headquarters in Atlanta. Employees filled elevators carrying coffee cups, laptops, and folders. completely unaware that one quiet decision made 3 days earlier had already started changing the future of several careers. On the 31st floor, Amani Brooks Holloway adjusted the sleeve of her tailored navy jacket before studying her reflection in the polished glass outside the executive conference room. She looked confident, because confidence had become part of her reputation. During the past 5 years, she had built a record of efficiency, discipline, and difficult decisions that senior leadership admired. More than once she had been told she was the strongest candidate for the vacant Chief Operating Officer position. Today felt like another step toward that office. Her assistant approached carrying a digital tablet. "Congratulations in advance," she said with a warm smile. "Everyone says this meeting is basically a formality." Amani accepted the compliment with a modest nod, although privately she believed exactly the same thing. "Nothing is official until the board votes," she replied, but the small smile at the corner of her mouth remained. Across town, Kendrick entered a private office that very few people inside the corporation even knew existed. There was no name on the door, no executive title outside. Malcolm was already waiting with 3 organized binders, placed in perfect alignment across the conference table. Terrence connected a secure laptop to the large display mounted on the wall. Every file had been indexed, every system record verified, every communication preserved exactly as it had existed on the morning everything changed. Malcolm slid the first binder forward. No gaps, no missing timestamps. The digital signatures matched the authentication server. Kendrick slowly turned the pages. Reservation records, internal approvals, executive access history, security logs, voice recordings, screen captures. Nothing had been edited. Nothing relied on opinion. Facts required no emotion. His phone vibrated once. A message from Amani appeared on the screen. "Big day today. Wish me luck. Dinner tonight. We should celebrate." Kendrick looked at the words for several quiet seconds before locking the screen without answering. Terrence glanced toward him but asked nothing. The silence inside the room carried its own meaning. At exactly 8:30, Malcolm received another notification from corporate administration. "The board has assembled," he said. "One additional item was added to the agenda this morning." Kendrick looked up. Read it. Malcolm scanned the document before speaking. Special presentation by the company founder regarding future leadership and organizational culture. Terrence smiled faintly. "No one outside this room knows who that founder actually is." Kendrick closed the final binder and stood. He straightened the old leather watch resting beneath the cuff of his jacket, picked up the evidence file with steady hands, and walked toward the hallway. On the other side of the building, Amani accepted another round of congratulations. As she stepped toward the same boardroom, believing she was only minutes away from the promotion she had spent years chasing. The boardroom overlooked the Atlanta skyline through walls of uninterrupted glass. But almost nobody noticed the view that morning. 12 directors had already taken their seats around the long walnut table before the executive leadership team entered one by one. Unlike the executives, every board member already knew exactly who the founder was. They had worked with Kendrick Holloway for years behind closed doors, protecting the privacy he believed allowed the company to focus service instead of personality. What remained unknown was that the quiet man many employees recognized only as Amani's husband was also the majority owner of the entire organization. Amani walked in carrying a leather portfolio and greeted several vice presidents with relaxed confidence. She noticed a special item listed near the bottom of the agenda. Founder address. That was unusual. During her entire career, the founder had never personally attended an executive leadership review. Rumors had filled the company for years. Some believed he lived abroad. Others insisted he preferred complete anonymity. Nobody outside the boardroom had ever confirmed the truth. At precisely 9 o'clock, Malcolm Pierce stood beside the presentation screen. The conversations faded immediately. Before today's leadership review begins, he said, our founder has asked to personally address the executive team regarding the future culture and direction of Apex Horizon Aviation Group. Several vice presidents exchanged curious looks. One quietly whispered, "This has never happened before." Another straightened his tie and closed his notebook. Malcolm glanced toward the directors, who simply nodded. Then he looked at the closed door. "Please welcome our founder and chairman." The room fell completely silent. The handle slowly turned. 5 long seconds passed before the door opened fully. Kendrick Holloway stepped inside carrying a single black binder. His dark suit was simple, his expression composed, and the old leather watch rested quietly beneath the cuff of his sleeve. Every director immediately rose from the table in respectful greeting. Malcolm and Terrence stood beside them. The executives looked around in confusion before standing as well, uncertain whether they were witnessing a formal introduction or something entirely unexpected. Amani remained seated for only a brief heartbeat before following everyone else to her feet. Her eyes stayed fixed on Kendrick as he crossed the room without hesitation. He stopped beside the chairman's seat. Malcolm spoke with measured clarity, "Members of the executive leadership team. It is my privilege to formally introduce the founder, majority owner, and chairman of Apex Horizon Aviation Group, Mr. Kendrick Holloway." A stunned silence settled over the room. One vice president slowly lowered his pen. Another looked from Malcolm to Kendrick, then toward Amani, unable to reconcile what he had just heard. Color drained from Amani's face. She searched the board for signs of confusion, but every director simply watched with quiet respect. Kendrick placed the binder on the polished table and rested one hand lightly upon it. When he finally looked toward the executive team, disappointment spoke louder than anger ever could. "Thank you all for being here," he said calmly. "Before we discuss promotions, I believe we need to discuss one decision that revealed the true character of leadership when nobody believed the chairman was watching." The room remained silent long after Kendrick finished speaking. He did not raise his voice. He did not look around searching for agreement. Instead, he opened the black binder and placed the first document beneath the overhead camera. A reservation timeline appeared on the large display behind him. Every timestamp lined up with the next like pieces of a carefully built structure. On Tuesday morning at 5:29, he said calmly, "An emergency travel request entered our reservation system. It met every requirement for executive review." He pressed a small remote. Another page appeared. At 5:33, that request reached the office responsible for operational discretion. Another click. At 5:36, the request was denied. Nobody interrupted him. Malcolm walked to the display and opened a secure audit window. The digital authentication records appeared beside the reservation history. Every approval carried an encrypted signature that could not be altered after submission. Kendrick looked toward the directors before continuing. 7 minutes later, the protected seat inventory became available again. Another document filled the screen. At 5:43, the same inventory was assigned to another traveler under executive authorization. Raymond Carver's name appeared beside the boarding record. Several directors leaned closer. One quietly adjusted his glasses. Another reached for the printed agenda before slowly setting it back down. Kendrick never looked away from the evidence. "This company teaches that procedures protect fairness. I believe that principle. I built this organization on that principle. But procedures become meaningless when they are applied differently depending on who stands at the counter." He pressed the remote again. An internal message filled the display. "Keep one executive seat available until Mr. Carver arrives. Decline all additional requests, regardless of circumstance. Approval has already been granted." The sender's identification appeared beneath the message. Imani Brooks Holloway. Her breathing became noticeably slower. She stared at the screen without speaking. Kendrick finally turned toward her. His expression carried no anger, only the quiet exhaustion of someone who had already lived through the hardest part of the story. Do you recognize that instruction? Amani opened her mouth but no words came. Her eyes drifted toward Malcolm as if hoping someone would explain the situation differently. Nobody did. Kendrick continued in the same measured tone. The traveler requesting that emergency accommodation was attempting to reach his dying mother. He paused just long enough for the room to absorb the sentence. He never arrived in time. A heavy silence settled across the table. Kendrick rested one hand lightly against the worn watch beneath his sleeve before speaking again. That traveler was me. The words landed without force, yet every person in the room felt their weight. One director quietly lowered his head. Another closed his notebook without writing another line. Kendrick folded his hands together and looked directly at the board. Today is not about a missed flight. It is about whether we are willing to trust leaders who stop seeing people and begin seeing only positions, priorities, and convenience. That decision belongs to all of us. No one spoke after Kendrick finished. The silence itself became part of the record. Malcolm slowly collected the printed evidence, while the directors exchanged restrained glances that required no words. Finally, the chair of the governance committee cleared her throat. Celeste Voffen folded her hands on the table and looked directly at Amani. Do you dispute the authenticity of these records? Amani stared at the documents spread before her. She shook her head almost imperceptibly. No. Do you deny authorizing the override? Another pause. No. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. I approved it. Celeste nodded once before turning toward the rest of the board. Then this is no longer an investigation of facts. It is a question of judgment and leadership. One director who had served with the company for nearly 2 decades leaned forward. Emergency discretion exists because policies cannot predict every human circumstance. We trusted our executives to recognize those moments, another director quietly added. Instead, influence received compassion, while urgency received procedure. Around the table, heads slowly nodded in agreement. Kendrick remained standing without saying another word. He had not asked for punishment. He had only presented the truth. Celeste opened a sealed envelope that had been prepared before the meeting. Based on the governance charter and the unanimous recommendation of the ethics committee, following review of the authenticated operational records, the board hereby withdraws all consideration for executive advancement, removes Vice President Imani Brooks Holloway from operational authority effective immediately, and terminates employment for failure to exercise responsible leadership consistent with company values. The words settled heavily across the room. Imani closed her eyes for a brief moment before looking toward Kendrick. I did not know, she said quietly. I did not know it was you. Kendrick met her eyes with calm honesty. That is exactly the problem. She swallowed hard. If I had known. And he gently interrupted before she could finish. Would the outcome have been different? She looked down without answering. Neither of them needed the answer spoken aloud. Kendrick continued in the same steady voice. Every passenger deserves the same measure of dignity, whether they own this company or clean its floors. Compassion cannot depend on recognition. Imani slowly removed her executive identification badge and placed it on the polished table. The small piece of plastic landed with a soft click that seemed louder than anything else that morning. She stood, gathered nothing except her handbag, and quietly walked toward the exit. Before opening the door, she stopped for a brief second without turning around. I am sorry about your mother, she said. Kendrick lowered his eyes to the old leather watch resting beneath his sleeve. I believe you are, he answered. But some moments only come once. The door closed gently behind her. No one moved for several seconds. Then Celeste looked toward Kendrick. Mr. Chairman, the board is ready for your next recommendation. 3 months later, the morning sun stretched across the main terminal of Apex Horizon Aviation, Group's newly renovated headquarters, casting long bands of light across polished floors, where travelers hurried toward departure gates with coffee cups, backpacks, and quiet conversations about the people waiting for them at the other end of their journey. Kendrick stood near the large windows overlooking the runway, wearing the same old leather watch that still fit a little too tightly around his wrist. He checked the time, then looked toward Malcolm, who had just finished reviewing the first monthly report for a program that had quietly changed the company's culture. 187 emergency travel requests approved, Malcolm said. Every passenger reached a critically ill family member or attended a funeral. Not one request was denied because of status or position. Kendrick nodded without looking away from the aircraft preparing for departure. Above the ticket counters hung a simple bronze plaque. The Loretta Holloway Last Goodbye Initiative. Beneath the name appeared a single sentence, taken directly from the letter his mother had written during her final hours. Build things that help people find their way home. Employees walked past the plaque every morning before beginning their shifts. New hires learned the story during orientation. Managers received additional training reminding them that policies existed to serve people, never replace compassion. The lesson became part of the company, rather than merely part of its handbook. A young gate supervisor approached Kendrick carrying a small tablet. "Mr. Holloway, we just approved another emergency request. The passenger's father is in hospice care. We opened the final premium seat." Kendrick smiled gently. "Thank you for seeing the person before the reservation." She nodded with quiet pride before returning to her position. Later that afternoon, Kendrick drove alone to Savannah. Fresh flowers rested on the passenger seat beside him. The cemetery looked peaceful beneath a clear blue sky. He walked slowly across the neatly trimmed grass, until he reached the simple granite marker carrying his mother's name. He placed the flowers carefully at its base, and rested one hand lightly against the cool stone. "You were right," he said softly. "A name matters more than money." The breeze stirred the trees overhead exactly as it had on the day of her funeral. For the first time since receiving that early morning phone call, the weight inside his chest no longer felt like regret. It felt like purpose. He had not been able to change the past, but he had changed what the future would look like for countless families he would never meet. As he turned toward the parking lot, his phone vibrated with a message from Malcolm. Another family made it in time. Kendrick looked once more at the headstone, smiled quietly, and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Some fortunes built companies. Some built legacies. The greatest one his mother left behind was teaching her son that true leadership was never measured by power, wealth, or titles, but by whether someone else's hardest day became just a little less painful because of a choice he made.